Before starting this video, I just wanted to let you all know that I've set up my own Patreon account in case anyone watching wants to support this channel and help me afford the resources to make my videos even better going forward. I've set the price at only $3 a month US for now, so if you're willing and able to afford to help support me on Patreon, though absolutely no worries if you can't, I've added the membership link in the description. Anyway, let's get to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
There was a time when winning a Moon Man at the MTV Video Music Awards, or VMAs, genuinely meant something. From the moment Madonna performed in a wedding dress to open the very first edition of the awards, the VMAs would become one of the music award shows to watch in any given year. In fact, it has sometimes been referred to as the Super Bowl for youth, given the demographic it has traditionally most often appealed to. Winning a coveted trophy of an astronaut landing on the moon, a reference to one of the very first things people saw when MTV hit the airwaves in 1981, not only was a nod to both the artist's popularity and their contribution to pushing music videos forward, but also a clear sign they had made it. Despite decades upon decades of MTV no longer showing music videos, the VMAs have soldiered on, bearing witness to some especially controversial moments in music history along the way. Those moments, ironically, are the kinds that have traditionally kept the VMAs' cultural relevance above ground. But nowadays, it's safe to say that kind of relevance has cannonballed back into the depths of the ocean. Earlier this month, the nominees were announced for this year's edition of the awards, and two categories immediately stood out to me for all the wrong reasons. The rock and alternative categories, especially rock, are a joke, and the nominations are a damning sign of how woefully out of touch MTV is with that part of the music world. Worst part is, it's been that way for a long time now. Just by looking at some of the names of the rock category nominees in recent years, it's not only unsurprising that none of those songs are nominated for the evening's biggest categories, but it's painfully obvious that the channel's concept of rock and alternative music needs a serious, hard reset. This is partly because with time, genres have become harder and harder to pin down as more and more music gets released into the wild, more and more people consume it on the internet, and more artists have diverse influences as a result, many of which are far removed from your typical meat and potatoes rock and roll. Considering this, how accurate is it to describe a band or artist with instruments as simply rock or alternative and keep them in that box? Anyway, let's break down this year's nominees for those two categories, starting with Best Rock. Bon Jovi, Coldplay, Green Day, Kings of Leon, Lenny, Kravitz, U2. Every single one of those artists are years, if not decades, removed from their last big hit, or even their last top 40 hit for that matter. Bon Jovi's last appearance on the Billboard Top 40 was in 2007. Coldplay, who arguably haven't been anything resembling a rock band for a long time now, have had two top 3 US singles in recent years, but needed to collaborate with BTS and the freaking Chainsmokers to get them there. Green Day last hit the top 40 in 2009 with 21 Guns, which won them that award in that year's ceremony. 21 Guns. Kings of Leon haven't been in the top 40 since 2010 with Radioactive. Lenny Kravitz, cool a guy as he may be, saw his nominated song Human only make the top 30 on Billboard's Adult Contemporary and Adult Pop Airplay charts. His last top 40 appearance, literally 2 decades ago, with 2004's Lady. U2, whose music has been a shadow of its old self for decades now, last made the Hot 100 in any form back in 2013. And last hit the top 40 by the skin of their teeth 4 years earlier. The Best Alternative category also leaves a great deal to be desired for me. Sure, there are two nominated artists who are very much of the moment, those being Benson, Boone, and Teddy Swims. Only problem is, both of those artists are very pop-leaning, as are, of course, Imagine Dragons. Just one legacy act is nominated here, that being Linkin Park, for a posthumous song released 7 years after the passing of frontman Chester Bennington. Meanwhile, Hozier's music frankly leans more toward R&B than alternative, but isn't as much of a stretch for this category, relatively speaking. Ditto for Bleachers, who are very much an indie pop act, though it also feels like this nomination is because Jack Antonoff is literally inescapable. Dude is truly the male Julia Fox at this point. Your move, Charlie. Even despite this, it feels mighty weird that Noah Kahan didn't even get a solitary nomination this year. But that's just a symptom of a much deeper problem with the VMAs right now. Sure, there are some more modern outliers who have gotten nominations in recent years. Boy Genius, Steve Lacy, the 1975, and Glass Animals come to mind, as do Wet Leg, who were nominated for the Push Performance of the Year award, whatever that means, in 2022. The rock categories will sometimes honor bands like Italian glam rockers Måneskin, who won Best Rock in 2023 above a host of legacy acts, despite being largely maligned by critics. Again, that's been the exception rather than the rule. Those technically are the kinds of bands that, if MTV wants to keep up with newer, younger artists, should be nominated for categories like Best Alternative. Like I said earlier, this has been going on in some form or another for years now, though not quite as blatantly as this. A Best Rock category wouldn't even be added until 1989, won that year by Guns N' Roses. Cool, a contemporary act at that time. Good job! But the 90s would see Aerosmith, a band who had been famous since the early 70s, win the award 4 times, beating out younger acts like Faith No More, Alice in Chains, the Foo Fighters, and Rage Against the Machine along the way. Clearly, the legacy act card was one MTV had no problem playing even back in the day. Aerosmith did, however, lose the award twice during that decade, both to two grunge titans, Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. The late 90s and early aughts would see nu metal reign supreme in that category, with Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Linkin Park each winning at least once between 1999 and 2003. The following 3 years would see the award go to a mixture of newer bands like Jets, Are You Gonna Be My Girl? Well, I can see you home with me. A veteran band reaching new commercial heights in Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And a former hardcore punk band who'd given their sound a more accessible emo sheen in AFI's Miss Murder. But after that point is when things would start to get hairy. First, the category wasn't even included in the 2007 ceremony. It would be brought back the next year and awarded once more to Linkin Park. At this point, the band's peak had already more or less come and gone, even though the winning song, Shadow of the Day, peaked at number 15 on the Hot 100. Green Day's 21 Guns won the following year, then 30 Seconds to Mars, then the Foo Fighters, then Coldplay, then 30 Seconds to Mars again. These are not exactly the most inspired choices when compared to some of the then newer bands who lost to them. MGMT, Paramore, Florence and the Machine, Cage the Elephant, Vampire Weekend. Then, Lorde won the award in 2014 for Royals, which, as great an artist as Lorde is, and as much as she was more in tune with that zeitgeist, is most abjectly not a rock song. MTV did Arctic Monkeys real dirty that year. 2015 saw Fall Out Boy win for Uma Thurman, a song I literally hadn't heard before making this video, before things took another turn. 2016 to 2019 should have seen the category be renamed as Best Pop Rock, with 21 Pilots winning 2 straight years, followed by Imagine Dragons and Panic at the Disco, the latter of whom won Video of the Year in 2006 for I Write Sins Not Tragedies. Other nominees during that time: Coldplay again, Fall Out Boy again, this time with a duet with Demi Lovato, All Time Low, The 1975, 30 Seconds to Mars, and Lenny Kravitz, with 21 Pilots and Imagine Dragons both losing at least once during that stretch. Sure, the Foo Fighters and Green Day also got nominations, but the way the category leaned pop is still sobering to this day. The 2020s have been the decade where MTV has thrown any last bit of caution to the wind with the Best Rock category, with all but one of the last four winners being veteran legacy artists. Starting with Coldplay, John Mayer, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers before Måneskin won it last year. As hilariously epic as Flea's acceptance speech 2 years ago was,
I love cockroaches and dirt and trees and every human being and the and the fish in it and deer antlers and birds and sky.
It's still unsettling to see MTV become so reliant on acts best known among Gen Xers and even boomers for this category, considering the bands who have lost that award this decade are Evanescence 2 years in a row, Fall Out Boy, Green Day, The Killers 2 years in a row, Foo Fighters 3 years in a row, Lenny Kravitz, Kings of Leon, Muse 2 years in a row, Shinedown, 3 Days Grace, Jack White, Linkin Park, and Metallica. Many of them for songs a lot of listeners wouldn't have known existed. As for the alternative category, that award was first introduced in 1991, and the choices for winners at first were very in touch with their respective climates. Jane's Addiction won the inaugural Best Alternative Video Award for Been Caught Stealing. Then Nirvana for 3 straight years, then Weezer, The Smashing Pumpkins, Sublime, and Green Day before the category was retired until 2020. But when it came back, oh boy. The first 2 years in a row went to rapper turned annoying pop punker Machine Gun Kelly, then Måneskin, then Lana Del Rey, who, despite being around for more than a decade, has maintained her cultural relevance throughout. The same can more or less be said about Paramore, who were nominated last year for This Is Why.
This is why I don't leave the house.
But among the artists who've lost during that time, some new-ish solo artists like Phineas and Willow Smith, but also repeat nominees like the 1975, All Time Low, 21 Pilots, and Imagine Dragons, as well as long-established veterans like Panic at the Disco, Blink-182, Avril Lavigne, Fall Out Boy, and yet again, 30 Seconds to Mars. Most of these artists are only alternative in the broadest of senses and lean much more toward pop than rock, or frankly anything that would have been considered alternative in the 90s. The most frustrating part is, rock music, or any music with guitars, bass, and drums, has never died, despite what so many keyboard warriors of a certain age might want you to believe. It has always existed and always will, and it's still producing quality bands from all ends of that ecosystem who would presumably benefit greatly from exposure at the VMAs, and who would definitely make the ceremony fresher and more interesting to watch, even if viewers might not all be familiar with those specific artists. That is, of course, if MTV would even show the category during the main broadcast to start with, which hasn't always been the case in recent years. But even a quote-unquote alternative act as massively popular as Tame Impala has only mustered one VMA nomination in its history, for Best Direction in 2016. Phoebe Bridgers, despite being recognized by the Recording Academy with 4 Grammy nominations, has yet to earn a single VMA nod outside of Boy Genius. Then there are a host of other acts from that universe who are given the cold shoulder despite pretty much all of them being mainstays on the festival circuit. Fontaine's DC, Turnstile, Amyl and the Sniffers, Idols, The Last Dinner Party, Big Thief, Churches, Krungbin, Shame, Wolf Alice, Japanese Breakfast, Snail Mail, Beabadoobie, I could go on and on. Even a band like Bring Me the Horizon, who have shockingly never been nominated for a Moonman despite their immense popularity, would be a more appropriate and interesting act to nominate for those categories. These artists I just named wouldn't be the most outlandish choices to win these awards necessarily either. After all, the VMAs did once award Avenged Sevenfold as Best New Artist instead of Rihanna. Maybe part of the problem here is that rock and alternative chart trends in the US are noticeably milquetoast and repetitive nowadays. The mainstream rock airplay chart, aka Billboard's resident butt rock chart, has still seen bands like Pearl Jam, Metallica, Green Day, Foo Fighters, Linkin Park, Godsmack, Papa Roach, Five Finger Death Punch, Shinedown, and freaking Daughtry hit the #1 spot just this year. Meanwhile, the artists who've most frequently hit the top spot on Billboard's alternative airplay charts for much of the past 10 years have often been long-established bands from yesteryear or yesterdecade. Blink-182, Sum 41, Fall Out Boy, The Foo Fighters, Weezer, Paramore, The Black Keys, Cage the Elephant, Green Day, Kings of Leon, Death Cab for Cutie, Coldplay, The Killers, The Red Hot Chili Peppers. Oh, and a good handful of songs by the Lumineers, Imagine Dragons, 21 Pilots, and freaking Mumford & Sons. Geez, there's totally no hierarchy in modern rock music today, is there? Mind you, we do live in a time where it feels like those artists are desperately clinging on to the massive popularity they once unquestionably had. Hell, at least one of the most successful rock artists of the 70s has tried publicly boasting up his own legacy while belittling younger and more contemporary artists during a visit to those artists' hometown, no less. Plus, a lot of rock bands aren't favored by the music industry machine the way they once were, and when they are, they're often flagrant throwback bands like Greta Van Fleet, or solo pop artists with pop-punk influences a la Olivia Rodrigo. The fact that MTV goes the infuriatingly safe route every time they decide the nominations for those categories is arguably helping supercharge the VMAs' overall decline in relevance. It's also as clear a sign as anything that MTV's disconnect from the cultural moment rivals that of the Grammys. And therein lies the problem. The VMAs are supposed to not only honor the best music videos of the year, but also represent the current musical climate from genre to genre within one show. A youth-geared reaction to the Grammys, which have almost always been horribly out of step with the zeitgeist. Sure, the acts they currently nominate for those categories would theoretically draw in some viewers, particularly of older demographics, but being out of touch with the current rock music climate is doing the VMAs far more harm than good at this point. It's also one of many reasons why the VMAs feel largely irrelevant today. Like an outdated institution perpetually on the verge of a Weekend at Bernie's situation. Instead of giving significant opportunities for exposure and audience growth to younger artists and bands whose styles lean further left of center than many others nominated for these awards, MTV seems content to just keep back-patting bands who haven't been of the moment in many, many years. If MTV wants the VMAs to matter again, they have to prioritize younger and more contemporarily relevant bands, even at the cost of a minor dip in viewership. Because ultimately, those who do watch the ceremony will see these newer bands for the first time, and the increase in exposure could be a boon for the artist, just like it was for Florence and the Machine back in 2010, whose performance that year helped her cross over to the American mainstream. But overall, MTV's perception of those genres is stuck in either the 90s or early 2000s, and looks to be in a serious rut, especially when an entire generation of bands consistently gets snubbed in favor of elder statesmen. And the most upsetting part is, it doesn't have to be that way. At best, the VMA strategy, like I said earlier, feels like a bold-faced attempt to secure a certain amount of guaranteed viewership. But it's not original, it's likely not really keeping the award show's declining ratings afloat, and it reinforces the boring, lazy, played-out narrative that rock music was at its peak back in the good old days, and that they don't make music like this anymore. Which we hear from lots of folks who can't be bothered to seek out new rock music for themselves and still expect the radio and/or the algorithm to give them everything they'd want or need. Sure, favoring newer bands over acts whose commercial peak was in the 90s or 2000s is undoubtedly a gamble for MTV. But at this point, it's a gamble well worth taking. Thanks so much for watching. What did you think of this video? Are you going to watch the VMAs this year or not? Which modern day bands or artists did I forget to mention here? Who do you think should be nominated for this year's Best Rock and Best Alternative categories? And as always, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're new here, and like I said at the start of this video, support me on Patreon if you're willing and able to. This has been Sound and Vision, and I'll be back with another video very soon.